Welcome to the Date Forever podcast. Keep your relationship fueled up with strategies discovered by couples and experts. Because at Fuel Collective, we believe better relationships will equal a better world. You are about to discover specific insights and tools that cost little or nothing to implement to help you date forever. And now, here are your hosts, a couple who always have a half-packed suitcase and a date night in the calendar, Sammy and Nathan Yeager.
Hello and welcome to Date Forever. In this week's episode, we're chatting all about resilience. What is it and how do we improve it? The importance of focusing on the things you can control, and how the art of practicing gratitude can rewire your brain. But before we get into that, Sammy, what's been fueling you up this week?
Oh, I've got two.
Yeah?
Yeah. So if you listened to last week's episode, you would have heard that Valentine's Day for us did not go to plan. And I got whacked with a debilitating migraine.
Yeah, not ideal.
Not ideal.
No.
But what that did mean was that we had a replacement Valentine's Day date on Friday night.
Valentine's 2.0.
2.0.
Yeah.
Yeah, which was super low-key and cash. Bottle of champagne,
Yeah.
delicious pizza, great view over the beach. So we had a little date night and it was so nice and we just hung out. It was windy AF.
It was windy.
Which kind of just made it funnier because our 2.0 was probably still not perfect. But it was just really nice to have some quality time together and have a chat and hear a bit about what's going on in your world and share a bit about what's going on in my world. So that was my fuel up number one.
Yeah.
But my fuel up number two was that I got together with a group of girlfriends on Sunday afternoon.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we had a really lovely afternoon putting together a list of 100 things that bring us joy. So this kind of came about because one of my girlfriends had set herself the intention to take herself on 12 dates this year. So things that she really loves to do on her own and just to really indulge in those things and make time for it, make it a priority. And as a group of girls, we were just chatting about what we would like to do if it was just your own choice and you're not trying to accommodate anyone else. But yeah, we started getting started brainstorming all of the things that we wish we were making more time for. So we got together and brainstormed a whole heap of different things that bring us joy. And, you know, some of them were big things and some of them were small things and micro moments and things that you don't need to go anywhere for. Like everything from opening that fresh bag of coffee, like that just smells absolutely divine, like that absolute pure moment of joy, but right through to like the first hug when you haven't seen someone for a really long time, like how great that moment of joy is, and, you know, wonderful sunsets and sunrises. And yeah, for me, my ongoing theme of things that bring me joy is they're free or very expensive.
Either end of the spectrum.
Yeah, totally. But it was really nice and we took the time to share and we were getting ideas from one another, and I think it was just a really nice reminder that there are so many things that we can inject into our everyday, week, month, quarter, year for ourselves to consciously look for those moments of joy. And global pandemic life, it's been a struggle for a lot of people, myself included. So just the reminder that we do have a lot to be grateful for and do have a lot to be joyful for amongst the shit, because I'm not going to pretend that there hasn't been shit. There has been shit. And there will continue to be. But there's definitely lots of joy too. So those are my two big fuel ups.
Yeah.
What about you? What was yours?
So mine was our replacement Valentine's date as well. But my other one was just a kind of a smaller moment. But on Sunday, we just took some time out to go down to the beach. It was just a bit of an impromptu little beach date. And it was really nice to just stop and not have anything to do or anywhere else to be and just take some real downtime to relax and just be with ourselves.
And people watch.
Yeah, and people watch. That was great too.
That's definitely on my joy list.
But yeah, just having that little bit of downtime to not be anywhere or not need to be doing anything and just, have it for ourselves and be with our own thoughts. And it was really nice.
I loved that too.
Yeah.
Lots to fuel up this week.
There was, yeah. But now here's this week's guest.
Today we've got Jack Annear joining us. After waking up in an ICU hospital bed in December 2007 with no recollection of how he got there or why he hurt everywhere, Jack was to discover he'd lost 3 of his mates and almost his own life in a terrible car accident just outside of Mount Gambier. Coming to grips with his new physical norm during a multi-year recovery, as well as the emotional gap left by losing 3 friends, he was to learn a number of coping mechanisms that are key traits of resilience. Not content to let the car accident define him, for the last 5 years he has been heavily involved in a number of road trauma prevention programs as a guest speaker and fundraiser for organisations such as Royal Flying Doctor Service and Red Cross Lifeblood. In 2020, he has taken to talking to school students to knowledge transfer the resilience lessons he's learned so students can apply the same resilience strategies to tough times in their lives. Having recently cracked over 30 presentations done and 1,000 students presented to, turning his negative into a positive is what gets him out of bed in the morning. He's here to demonstrate that resilience plays a part in all facets of life, including relationships, and wants to give you tips on how to apply it to yours. Welcome to the show, Jack.
Thank you, Sammy. Thanks, Nathan. Pleasure to be here.
No worries.
We are stoked that you are not just here in this conversation, but like here on the planet.
Yeah, thank you. Some of the reactions from the doctors when I'd recount the list of injuries, it does make you feel a little bit like, oh, tell me I'm pretty, even though it's trauma. But yeah, it was an interesting time for sure.
Hey, so what that bio didn't tell us, it didn't tell us your relationship status, and you're on a podcast about relationships.
Yes, that's true. So I am happily married with my first child sleeping at the other end of the house. So in a nutshell, 2014, I met Ivana, the love of my life, via Oasis, a Tinder predecessor. And then after a very good first date and continue to have many, many other good dates, I informally moved in with her. So I was always at her house and never at my own. So then when we finally pulled the trigger and called ourselves formally moved in 2015 to Glenelg here in Adelaide, that was the first day of the rest of our lives, and a very, very lovely, perfect sized house for us. And, find out more about each other's thoughts, hopes, wants, dreams, feelings. And until in 2017, there was a little staircase that had like a mezzanine floor as a second bedroom, and I always used to jump the last 2 and land really heavily. And Ivana would always go, "You're going to break your leg doing that." And so one day I did. Little did she know, ring in the pocket, bam. When she came around the corner expecting to see, my bone poking out the leg or something like that, here I was like, And once she realised I'd proposed to her, she broke into tears, happy tears, and said yes. We got married at the end of 2018 on New Year's Eve. And then little Pip came into our lives on the 10th of May this year. So, a lovely, lot of fun to date in the past 7 years.
Yeah, beautiful.
Incredible.
So tell us, Jack, what on earth is resilience?
Resilience, there's a lot of textbook definitions talking about how a structure, the engineering definition is like how well a structure handles forces against it. But the one principally which I deal with is in mental health, which is basically how quickly you bounce back from hard times in your life. The shorter the time, the more resilient you are. So a number of traits which people who are resilient generally have, which is they focus on the things that they can control. They show gratitude towards all the small things and awesome things happening around them. When they get in a bit of a fix and find themselves in a bit of a negative thought cycle, they ask themselves if the thought or action is helpful or harmful to them. And they're very good connectors and have heaps of empathy towards their fellow human.
Wow.
So obviously in this journey that you've been through around this car accident and having to physically, I guess, heal and physically rebuild yourself, but then also mentally come back from it, you've obviously had a lot of exposure to this. So do you think you had resilience before this, or how did that kind of play out?
I think, I look back at really my life up until then. I was in a small or regional centre, so Mount Gambier is the second largest city in South Australia. I went to a private school, and Mum always put the fear of God into me that if I walked past the local public car school on my way home, I was going to get beaten up. So I lived a pretty sheltered existence. And then I suppose, really the hardest thing I think I had to deal with was trying to get $50 back off my ex-girlfriend that I'd loaned her when we were together in year 12. So that's probably what sticks out as the hardest challenge I really had to face outside of your normal 12 ups and downs that all that brings. So yeah, I wouldn't have identified myself as very resilient at all. Like I had a few, I got stuck in, I loved organising sports teams, so I would have called myself a leader, but not resilient.
So Jack, take us back. So December 2007, how old were you?
I was 18.
Yeah. So pretty formative years to be having such a critical moment of trauma.
Yeah. So to wake up in the hospital and just be like, where the hell am I and what's happened to me? Yeah, after thinking you're indestructible and, some of the stupid stuff you did in cars, like growing up, to suddenly be on the receiving end of that and be the 0.001% where everything, the stars align and everything goes catastrophically wrong for you. Yeah, it was a lot to come to grips with, when waking up in that bed, yeah.
Jack, you're painting a pretty, horrid kind of picture, hey? Like those stories that you hear about on the news about teenage boys in cars, and you've woken up in hospital and you've been told that some of your mates are now not here. Like, talk to us a little bit about how you even begin to come to grips with, what's happened.
Yeah, it was, I suppose, the first thing I do remember, because if there's anything that's burned into my mind, it's Mum telling me for the first time what had happened. I remember coming out of the coma. I was in and out. The drugs was scrambling my memory a bit. But I do remember asking Mum, what happened to me? Like, how did I get here? And she said, you've been in a car accident. And then over a number of days, I said, was everyone okay? Was everyone okay? And it was about 3 days in, she said, no, Jack, not everyone is okay. Tim Smith passed away. Ben Horrigan passed away. And Chuka passed away. And you just... The first time hearing it is I guess, the opening 5 seconds is a bit of disbelief until things settle in and you're like, wait, hang on, she's serious, because I line that up with how I'm feeling. And I guess it must be true considering how much I heard in this hospital bed. And yeah, it took a lot of coming to grips with, I suppose, being in that hospital bed in the Royal Adelaide Hospital. I think I may have come to Adelaide 5 times in my formative years. So I just had no emotional connection to the stuff around me. So it wasn't until I got back home to Mount Gambier some months later that I really started dealing with the fact that there was a giant Chuka, Huri and Schmitty-sized hole in my life that I had to come to grips with. Yeah, so it took time and it took really placement and associating the boys with some of the things for me to actually come to grips with the fact that they weren't there. But it certainly was a hell of a journey, that's for sure.
So during this time, you've kind of discovered resilience, worked out what it was, and then have demonstrated some of it. So why is this skill or this strength or this trait of resilience important? Well,
I probably went around it the wrong way. It's been splashed all around how resilient are our communities in the face of COVID and lockdowns and all these sorts of things. So I suppose about how well as I said earlier, how well you bounce back. So the best way you should really have it done is be actively practicing and skilled in these resilient traits before you come across rough seas in your life, and then it can smooth the seas as well as help you come back and adjust to the new normal a lot faster.
So how do we know if we've got these traits already, or if we probably need to build some of those muscles before the asteroid hits?
Yeah, it is one of those things where you don't really have any idea of just how strong your muscle is until you get that real test. While I didn't probably identify them even as resilience until further, much more time's gone down past it. But, I found out that focusing on those things in my control, that was probably the first one I did and by far the easiest to identify and actively think, oh, I'm being resilient now, or, I'm focusing on the things in my control now. And the early days in the hospital bed when I couldn't even walk or I couldn't even sit up above 30 degrees. But one of the goals they gave me for me to continue my recovery back in Mount Gambier, they said, we need you to sit above 30 degrees, sit up out of bed for an hour and walk again. And basically, so the physios gave me some stretches to strengthen my core, which would help me walk again when I could. So it was like, okay, I've got spare time because I was in hospital not doing much at all. All I could do, the options were watch Test cricket, watch Days of Our Lives, or basically do my stretches. So I was like, this one's going to actively help me. So if I do my stretches, I'll get back to walking quicker and then ultimately get back to home in Mount Gambier where I could really continue my recovery And then, along the way, like I found once I got home, I realized, it's not the sunshine and roses view that I sort of had in my mind when I would return home. I had to actually adapt to this new normal. And I had to find, what was I grateful for around me at the time? Like one of the big things I remember is my doctor, because I'd lost a lot of weight while I was in my coma. And my doctor actually said, look, I'm really worried about how much you weigh at the moment. You're about to head into Mount Gambier winter, which is going to be brutal because it's about as cold as Melbourne down there. And so he said, look, I want to put on weight really fast. So here's a written prescription, which I've got to dig out at home somewhere, for 1 meal of fast food every day until you hit 60 kilos, which I was 35 at the time, which was tiny for a guy who's 6'1". So, I suppose you look back at that and you're like, I'm never going to have this again in my life. Like, how good is that? My legend of a doctor.
Yeah, no doctor's ever going to give you a script for McDonald's ever again.
Exactly. And then you'd find, like, my friends, I was pretty boring. Like, my life literally consisted, once I got home, of get out of bed in the morning, go on the couch, then back to bed, with occasionally going to the toilet and being showered, or both of which had to be done by my mother because of my injuries.
Gotta love that as a teenage boy.
Yeah, so massive confidence hit there. But I suppose that was another thing. I focused on what I could control, which was like, if you can't control anything about your situation, you can control the way that you think about it. And I found in that situation to be like, okay, well, I'm going to make a deal with myself to be like, this is shit. There's no two ways about it. But it's only going to be short term. You've got a day to go back and have your final surgery for you to recover and basically start doing all this again for yourself. And that's in 2.5 months. So cool. That's what we're aiming for, is just don't think about it for the next 2.5 months. But, even while I consider myself pretty boring, I had some stand-up friends who came around and were just like, oh, hey, mate. They filled me in on the goss that was happening around in their lives. All they could see was what I've been doing for the past 3 days since they'd last come past, because of the KFC and McDonald's wrappers around. So I wasn't really that much company, but just feeling included. And I thought, how awesome is that? And they also fed that habit once I told them I had a written prescription for KFC, Macca's, all that sort of jazz. So that was really good. I suppose, the helpful, harmful running, like as I started dealing with it a bit more and a little bit longer, went around and had my surgery and I was able to walk again. One of the other things I'd focused on was like, I'm going to deal with this mental stuff once I'm physically able to. So that final surgery and having practiced the gratitude and focused on the things that I could control, I found myself getting really wound up and anxious. And everyone's had like an anxiety loop at some point in their lives, whether that be, dealing with running through your head about how you're going to break up with an ex-girlfriend or now ex-girlfriend or boyfriend or anything like that. But in this situation for me, it was like, one of the things I got diagnosed with as a result, and one of the mental conditions I had to come to grips with, was it's survivor syndrome, survivor complex. It's basically like, why me? What did I do to survive that Chuka didn't, that Schmitty didn't, that Huri didn't? And it's like, there's so many variables in a high-speed car accident like mine that, it's impossible to put it on anything. And so many things that worked in my favor at that exact specific moment. But you still run through the things and you think, like, why do I deserve life more than any of those three boys did? And because I'd sort of been practicing gratitude and finding things that I could control, you start getting good at identifying some of these thoughts that come across in your head. And so I'd ask myself, I'd be like, whoa, hang on. Is this helpful or harmful for me in this situation? And obviously that's a harmful situation. And I'd try and focus on the things that I found helpful. So a lot of the time that would be desoing out on the town, because I'd started getting my license back, and because I'm fully physically recovered, I could hang out with my friends at that point. I got really involved and heavily involved in a road trauma support network that had newly started up in Mount Gambier. And those sorts of things that I found really helpful for my own psyche. I'd just see if I could channel that negative and nervous energy on. It takes a little bit more practice, that one. But then the final one that I'd been using the whole way was that resilient people have heaps of empathy. And I'd been using that from the very start. Shameless extrovert here. But when I got put down to the 6-bed ward, early days from the intensive care unit to 6-bed ward, one of the first things I started doing to fight some of the isolation that I had, I might have been in a 6-bed ward, but it was in a very alien place, and the cops still had my phone. The major crash investigation cops still had my phone to piece together what had actually happened on the night leading up to. So I was effectively stranded completely and just left alone with my own thoughts just after such a traumatic thing. But reaching out to them and just starting a conversation with, hey, mate, how'd you end up in here? And it's just amazing what those little open-ended questions, people you picked the ones that were sort of like, oh, I'm very guarded, I'm going to keep guarded. So, and then you connect better with the ones who are a bit more open. Like I was very open and told me exactly what happened. And yeah, there was some amazing stuff that came out along the way just from being so open with my story. So I kept doing that. And trauma, as awful as it is like such an amazing connector. You don't necessarily need to have been in a car accident. You could have gone through just something like a terrible breakup or a grandfather or a grandmother might have died. Like that's a traumatic time as well. And any time that there's a lot of emotion involved, that's really good for accessing or, using your empathy to see the world from that person's view. And using those 4 traits, they're basically the cornerstones of resilience that I found I used in my journey. And so that was, they're the traits I used during my journey.
Yeah. So, Jack, as you know, we're here on a podcast all about relationships, and that's about dating yourself and having a really strong relationship with yourself, but then also having a relationship with another person. So I'd love to know, like, from your point of view or from your experience, what would be happening in our relationships if one or both of us were lacking resilience?
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously why I'm here on the podcast today is resilience. While I built up mine recovering from a car accident, absolutely. You mentioned about traumatic times. There's a spectrum of traumatic times for people depending on what's happening in their lives. And it's very applicable to different parts of your lives. So relationships are a classic example of where if you're not a resilient person or you're not strong in those resilient traits, I can see how frustrations would begin to boil over. Like, for example, there's it's a really interesting thing I was reading about the other day, actually, called an external locus of control. And that sort of, like, I think about myself in high school and just attributed it to bad things that were happening around me and was like, oh, I can't control that. That's out of my control. It's a black swan. Whereas an internal locus of control is someone who's very strong in what they can control. And in those misfortunes, which other people might say, why do bad things all happen to me? It's like, no, hang on. There were 3 things that I did that caused this bad thing to happen to me. And so I can imagine that people who are able to focus on those things in their control in a relationship are able to accept that, okay.
And hold some power to change it.
Yeah, that's right. The power to change it, or the fact that, there's been a blow up at me from my wife, like she's had a go at me about something and there might have been a little bit of miscommunication as to the underlying cause of that. But then once it's explained of how she's feeling or he's feeling, then you can actually be like, I can change this. And my actions deliberately, that internal locus of control is like, my actions deliberately cause this. I'm going to be a better person as a result. Gratitude, most definitely in a relationship, to be like, as the sea of normalcy sort of washes over everybody, they can take each other for granted. So I know myself and my wife actively practice to say thanks heaps for, she makes me a lot of coffees while I'm working from home. I'm happy to go out and get takeaway for her while she's trying to settle Pip. And, I think nothing of it, but she's always like, thank you so much for grabbing that for me. It's just such a stressor that I then don't have to think about dinner and that sort of thing. So just, I guess, not letting it fall by the wayside. And like, I probably err on the side of thanking her too much and it's starting to be like, here he comes again, thanking me for stuff that I've just done. But, I think that's really important. And and I love it when it's done back to me. So I try to keep the cycle going effectively. I
love that attitude of, reward and applaud, especially the behavior that you want to see more of.
I love that. Reward and applaud.
Yeah.
But so I think that's right. And, you got to show that bit of what's the word?
Reciprocity.
Yes, that's the one.
That's the one. Normally it's me stumbling over that word.
So, a bit of reciprocity doesn't go astray either. So, just thank them. And like, I'm a really nervous person at the best of times. And sometimes I stumble over my words in order to just keep a conversation going. But sometimes all you need to do is be like, thanks. And then that's it. And just leave it, walk away, finish up with a hug. And that's the end of the interaction. So practicing reciprocity, got it right second time. That's the other partnering part of gratitude so those two go hand in hand. It was what was it? Reward and applaud.
Yeah. It's really recognize, reward and applaud.
Okay.
Yeah. Reward and applaud has nice, sharp, memorable tone to it. Yeah.
It does.
Yeah. And then I suppose the other parts, if I can just quickly brush over them, helpful, harmful checklist, how you can apply that into your relationship is, I guess it's, again, identifying those behaviours, stopping them before they come to a point where you need to reflect on your behavior and say, I had control of that behavior, and say, whoa, stop, hang on, is this action I'm doing right now helpful or harmful for my relationship? And empathy, the great connector. Like, if you can't see the world from your partner's shoes, then I would probably question some of I'd consider that a key foundation of the relationship. And if you're dismissing your partner, you can't see the world from their view, and you're dismissing them by saying they're being irrational, unreasonable, then that's something you really, really need to work on pretty quick smart.
So you've kind of mentioned like a few of these tools that you've got in your belt to be able to have some resilience. So can we actively kind of build that, and how do we actually go about kind of building that resilience muscle?
Yeah, as I said, I suppose if really the structure in which I sort of identified them was almost the order in which you can sort of build them. If you focus on those things that you can control, like always think, like ideally you're not going to get into a situation where it causes a blow up in the relationship. But, I remember how much my wife used to love the surprise dates we'd go on, or the themed surprise dates we'd go on. So I can control that. So what am I going to do is I'm going to ask her for a free night, and I'm going to ask her for a letter, more on this later, and like, let's go somewhere and get, here's what you should dress up like. And, I guess even just planning that, and the fact that you're taking control of doing something that makes your partner feel good, which then leads onto, them showing gratitude towards you, to say, oh my God, thank you so much for organizing this. That was amazing. And then practicing that gratitude. Now that's actually a superpower, or I'd consider it as close to as you can get, in that if you actually write down 3 good things that happen to you each day, for as little as 3 weeks or 21 days, you actually change the wiring in your brain. So even if you're a bit of a pessimist, try that gratitude 21-day challenge. Yeah, the science is there to back up that people, they find all the good things happening around them, as opposed to everyone will default to finding flaws. Unfortunately, it's just how we're wired. So yeah, just see if you can even apply that to your partner. I'm so grateful that she, for my example, like that she made me a coffee without me really needing to ask, and she just offered to do it. She took care of Pip in the night before I could even wake up, which, I'm always super grateful for. And then the helpful, harmful, that requires a little bit more, I guess, focus. You need to actually be able to identify the thought patterns or action patterns that are happening. But how you could do it is, you really got to start identifying your thoughts and saying, okay, and then basically identifying those thoughts by almost just on top of them being like, whoa, hang on a minute, what's going on here? Almost psychoanalyze yourself to break down what brought on the thought or action that you're doing right then and there.
Where did this come from?
Yeah, where has this come from within me? And then see if you can focus on, like, I always try and channel that energy, the anxious energy or whatever, or distract myself by focusing on what I can control. A theme date, doing something nice for my wife. So picking up that Pip's doing lip smacking while Ivana's asleep, and then, going, changing Pip, feeding her, putting her back down so she gets a solid block of sleep, is one example I can think of. But then, finally, that empathy is just like constantly asking just how people are, and just being prepared to just sit there and listen. As an extrovert, I'm really bad, and I can just talk and talk and talk, which then gets back to focus on the things that I can control, which is just, and just see actually how they're feeling, and see if I can see the world from their point of view, their shoes, and see their point of view.
Jack, there were so many tips in there, like keeping a gratitude journal, asking yourself those questions, like, is this helpful or is this harmful to my relationship and where I want to be? Like consciously making time for each other, rewarding and applauding, all of that sort of stuff is really amazing. So what I would love to know is, what are some of the habits or practices that you've got within your relationship with Ivana to keep it fueled up? What do you do?
Yeah, well, as I flagged a little bit before, when we first started dating, we used to give each other, I'm trying to remember the rules around it. I think it was letters of the alphabet. I think they were Latin based. So, it was more than just the 26. It was like, okay. 1, are you free on this date? Yes, no. All right, give me a letter. So I would give Ivana a J, and she would take me to, broadly themed in there. So, J's actually a hard one to think up off the top of my head.
Go again.
Jaeger bombs.
Yeah, like jazz dancing lessons, and something for food that starts with J. But, it doesn't need to be that much, but it's just the fact that it shows to your partner that you give a shit, that, like, you care enough to go out of your way to make all of this sort of stuff happen. We vaguely sort of said early days it was every 2 weeks pretty much, but now we've started implementing that again. because one of the best dates I actually do remember was Ivana thought she was going to stump me good and proper. And so she gave me this letter of the Icelandic alphabet. Not sure if that's Latin based, but I don't remember the letter, but it was, the word of it was an Icelandic word that was the day after tomorrow. So we went to my house and watched the film The Day After Tomorrow. For those of you who haven't seen it, it's basically climate disaster. So probably more apt than I like to think these days. But climate disaster, giant freeze.
We're all fucked, basically.
Yeah, exactly. So we're all absolutely stuffed. So we watched that movie. Then actually we went out for dessert, and coincidentally it was also the middle of winter. So there were a lot of really good tie-ins to it. Just all worked really, really well. And Ivana remembers that actually as well. She's like, yeah, that was a really good one. And so, yeah, we've started doing that again. I've just printed off an A2 thing at work of A to Z with a few wild cards in there. And recently it's sort of, we even look at some of the stuff and the photos that we've taken with Pip and our friends. And it's almost like you need a power outage to be like, oh, no internet either. Let's just go back through my photo gallery and see what I did this time, 12 months ago, whatever. And it really highlighted a little bit that we're not getting enough photos, like hard copy photos. Like you never print them out. You're just like, oh, snap, here we go, done, cool, all right. It's almost like when you go overseas and you play like tourist bingo to be like, selfie in front of the Eiffel Tower, selfie in front of the Colosseum. You chuck them up on Facebook and you're like, might get a Facebook memory every now and again, but there's no real connection to that. Whereas I think that's the other part of it is because we've got it on that A2 calendar or the A2 alphabet, it's big enough that you can stick a Polaroid in there and then put the date in there about what date we did and then roughly theme it and even have a little bit of text underneath, which I think will be a nice little reminder to be like, when times do get tough, like when Pip goes through another leap, which I think she's at the moment, God help our sleep, and things are tough and we're absolutely like on the verge of blowing up at each other because we're tired, like we can just go back and be like, oh, I remember. I guess it's always like, remember these times that we were awesome to each other, it's a reminder that you both still are awesome to each other despite what you're going through at that particular time.
And that you can be, that you have the skills, you have the capabilities to create experiences for yourself and for your partner. I really like that because sometimes we can get a bit like, things sort of start to slip away and then like it's one little ritual and then it's another little ritual and then it's like you skip a date and it's been a really long time and the relationship can fall down the priority list. So I like the idea of having it like physically, tangibly, something that you see to sort of represent your relationship and what you're creating together, but also that there's blank spaces. You've still got things to do.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's right. Like, especially, I think we settled on like once a month-ish, depending on how things are obviously going with Pip and all that sort of jazz. But like, yeah, it is that nice little reminder and to actually make time for it because, as you say, all those rituals can just fall by the wayside of wash away by the sea of normalcy. But, you need to make an effort to actually make sure that you remind each other that you both care.
Yeah, and I know that we've got a Trello board where we kind of compile all of our dates. We normally try and do 2 dates a month, and so we always go back and like pull the photos up and put them into a Trello board, and it's always really nice looking back through that board and going, oh, yeah, I love that night when we did French and we had pates and all sorts of things and we watched a French movie or whatever it was. And,
that's cool.
Yeah,
that's cool.
And it's always great to be able to flick back through that board and be like, oh, yeah, I love that date and we had some really good times together.
And it also makes us, because we know that we keep the Trello board, like it's like a little gallery, but because we know that we keep it, it also prompts us to take a photo, which we wouldn't necessarily always do as well. So it's kind of twofold. But, it's really nice because we've now got this quite long, where we can scan back and go, oh, that was fun, that was fun, that was fun. And I find like anything, the more that you do something, the more that you want to do it. It's like exercise. If you haven't exercised in a year, your likelihood of getting up and going for a run tomorrow, not high. Whereas if you went for a run last week, your likelihood of getting up and going for a run tomorrow, much higher. So I think the more frequent that we do these things, the cadence and the muscle is there and it's ready to use.
Yeah. And I just finished on my paternal leave on my month off that I had a book called Atomic Habits. And I loved one of the key takeaways in there. I don't know if you guys have read it, but each day be 1% better. And so I thought to myself, or each time you do a skill or practice habit stacking. Anyway, actually, I really highly recommend the book. But for me, I applied it to each day I'm going to be 1% better than I was, yesterday in my relationship. And particularly, child rearing for the first time, like, what's up? Like, what do we do? Where's the manual for this child if she's crying in the middle of the night? And, it's been like, there's been some things which certainly I've not been great at, which every day I wake up and I say I want to be 1% better each day and 1% better each day, because suddenly you're 3 months down the track and you're almost 100% better. Like, how good is that?
Yeah.
Yeah, incredible.
And 1% isn't hard, is it? 1% is like consciously leaving a Post-it note with that coffee for the person that you love. 1% is, when you're at the supermarket picking up groceries, that you pick up their favorite chocolate bar, or, those little 1%ers make a huge difference.
Yeah, that's right. So again, Atomic Habits highly recommend. And then, just all of that comes together to, I suppose, make the best relationship that you can.
Yeah, Jack, thank you so much for joining us and for telling us a little bit about your story and how you went about building that resilience muscle and how we can do that too. To say thank you for joining us today, we've given a month's worth of early childhood education to a classroom in Kenya. This project's looked after by an organisation called So They Can and was made possible via our partnership with Buy One, Give One. So thank you so much for making that possible.
No worries. Thank you for organising it. Yeah, I think education's the way to a better world. So, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
We think so too.
Yeah. So, Jack, if people want to connect with you or learn a little bit more about what you do, how should they do that?
The best way is definitely via my Facebook page, which I'll leave the link for you guys to put in the podcast. I'm reasonably active there, and I come up with times. I'm actually, motivational speaking is basically my jam that I do. And then I also have tips I go really a lot more into detail about that car accident and what it was like dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder, what it was like dealing with depression, what it was like with the survivor complex and other parts of the recovery, that just trying to be an open book and I suppose turn my negative into a positive for everybody who might be reading or listening.
Yeah. If anyone's moving through some of those things or they know someone who is, please do reach out to Jack. The conversations that we've had off air have been so open-hearted. So I definitely recommend reach out and connect and consume some of the ideas and content that Jack shares. Thank you so much for joining us. It was awesome.
Thanks heaps for joining us. If you love what we're doing here and want more, subscribe to the Date Forever podcast to make sure you never miss an ep. Come and hang out with us and other awesome couples who are fueling up their relationships in the Thriving Couples Collective Facebook group, or check us out at fuelcollective.com.au. Until next time, keep on dating, because better relationships equal a better world.